Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
We're back once again at the Corner of Truth and Courage. Thank you for joining us here today. We're continuing on with our discussions on the top 10 questions on the internet about Islam and the Middle East and all the different things that are going on there. We're on question number 4 today. We've already answered what is Islam and what do Muslims actually believe? Who is Muhammad? Why is he so central? What does the Quran say about violence, jihad, and peace and all that? That was yesterday's broadcast. And if you miss any of our broadcasts, you can always go to our website, fortressoffaith.com, and re-listen to our programs. We've got years of programs online. You can also catch them on YouTube and on Spotify. All right, well, let's get into it. Why are there so many conflicts in the Middle East right now? That's the 4th top question that's being asked, and kind of like follow-ups with these questions, the tensions between Iran, Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the historical records, colonialism, oil sectarian divides, and so on there. And also the religious and political things that drive the issues in the Middle East. Well, it's always been a mess for years and years and years. They seem to go from one conflict to the next. Will we ever have peace in the Middle East? Well, actually, yeah. But that's only when Jesus Christ returns and sets up his millennial kingdom. Will we have peace in the Middle East? That'll be the only time that we're really going to have that. There'll be false attempts at peace, and it will seem to be peaceful for a while. But we always see conflicts that rise up again and again and again. So let's get into it a little bit here. Let's try to break some of this down, okay? Well, a lot of history we got to get into. I'm going to kind of deal with the more modern stuff before I get into the more ancient stuff. So let's kind of work our way from the current time periods backwards, okay? Well, when Israel became a nation, or rather reclaimed their land and reinstituted themselves as a nation. They were already a nation. They were already there. They just finally were able to return to their ancestral home that we call Israel. Please, 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 if you're a Christian, if you love God, you want to stand on the right side of these things, never, never, never call that land Palestine. Don't offend God by that. God there never has been a real Palestine. This is something that was developed by the British after World War I. But we got to go back into World War I to kind of see what was going on a little bit there. Prior to this time, all of the Middle East was run by pretty much the Ottoman Empire. They had ruled the Islamic world for about 500 years. But they sided with the Germans during World War I, and they lost. And so the Allies won. The League of Nations was formed, if you remember some of your history. Britain and France were given the large task of controlling the Middle East. France had places like Lebanon and Syria and other places there. And England had, Israel wasn't there yet, but they wanted to create a home for Israel to return back to their ancestral land. So they called it Palestine. They came up with the name Palestine. They followed something that the Romans tried to erase the roots of that area and kind of give it a clean slate by calling it Palestine. The Romans tried that under the Emperor Hadrian. And so the British picked up on that idea. Well, we'll call all Jews and all Arabs in that area Palestinians. Jews actually carried Palestinian passports. But in 1948, the League of Nations, the British mandate, came to an end in May, I think it was. And so literally at midnight when the British sailed out, stepped down from their power, Israel stood up and said, "We declare ourselves as a nation, and this as Israel." And the idea was to allow the the Arabs to have their land, that just like the United Nations and the League of Nations was designing. Well, the Arabs did not like the idea of Israel claiming themselves as a nation, and so they went to war. All the Arabs came to war. We had from Iraq, from Syria, from Egypt, from Jordan and Lebanon, and all the Arabs all around attacked a little baby country that had just been born, that had very few pieces of war, and somehow not only did Israel survive and win that war, they gained land in that war. This happened 3 other times. Every time that the Arabs have tried to go to war with Israel, they keep losing. Every time. And every time Israel was outnumbered and outgunned. And every time somehow, and it's always interesting, it seems like just at the deepest, darkest moment that everything's going to be lost, that Israel's going to lose everything, something turns, and it's unexplainable. We can't explain it. It's simply God. God stepped in and turned what was going to be a disaster into a great victory every time. And so the Arabs have been kind of sore over this for quite some time. Now, you need to understand, not everyone out there are Arabs. You've got Jews, you've got Arabs, and they're the larger portion, the huge portion, almost like 90% of that whole area is occupied by Muslims, by Arabs. And then you have Persians. Persians are in Iran. They're not Arabs, but they're Muslim, okay? And they have a deep hate towards Israel, just like most Muslims will. So where does this hatred come from? Because a lot of the conflict that's there is a Muslim-Jewish divide. And that comes from the Bible. It comes from Abraham and his 2 sons. And so we go back to our Bible, and we know that Abraham was promised in chapter 12 that a blessing would be given to him, and that his seed will inherit the blessing. Well, the blessing is the real estate, is the land of the promised land. Okay? And Israel, the Jews and the Israelites were the northern kingdoms. Jews, or Judah, were the southern kingdoms, the southern kingdom. And united, that makes up, the Jewish population of the 12 tribes for 2,000 years. They inherited that land. That land was theirs and their home. We have history of it. We've got not only biblical history, we've got, lots of secular history that proves this, that land was their ancestral land. However, this blessing was going to go to the seed of Abraham. But the problem is Abraham had more than one son. He didn't just have Isaac, which is where we get the Jews from. We have Ishmael. Ishmael was the firstborn son, and this is where we get the Arabs. Now, Ishmael, the tradition of Bible days is that the firstborn son is the one who receives the blessing. But that's not always carried out in the Bible. We see many times where the firstborn son did not get the blessing, but rather the secondborn son. And so even though it may be tradition that the older son receives the blessing, it depends on the father of giving the blessing to his children, who he chooses. That at the end of the day, that's going to be what stands. And we're told very, very, very clearly. I just had a conversation with someone on this just yesterday. Very clearly, in Genesis chapter 15, God makes it clear. He is going to bless Ishmael. He's going to have 12 sons. He's going to be a father of a great nation. But But God says, my blessing will go with Isaac. And he was the promised son. Ishmael came into the scene, as you recall, where Abraham and Sarah, they're getting old, and they still, he doesn't have a child yet. And so they tried to go and follow man's ways. Well, take my maiden Hagar, Sarah says, and marry her and have a son with her, and she'll be the surrogate for me. There will fulfill God's blessing that way. Well, God said, no, that's not going to work. I'm still going to bless Ishmael. Chapter 15, he's going to be blessed, but my blessing will go with Isaac. Problem is, in the Quran was written, by the way, by an Arab about 600 years after 600 years after Jesus. Muhammad comes along, and he rewrites the Bible stories in the Quran. And instead of the blessing going to Isaac, guess who they go to? It goes to Ishmael. So the Arabs view their holy book, the Quran, that rewrites the stories of the Old Testament, which now blesses Ishmael instead of Isaac. And so therefore they look at that as the proof, as the only recognizable proof that the land should go to the Arabs. And so this is why they fight. They're largely fighting over this. And another part in the Quran, it makes the Jews the villains. It makes the Jews the prophet killers. It makes the Jews the enemy of Islam and Allah. And so therefore they want the destruction of all Jews. Arab lands, do not let Jews live amongst them. They practice genocide. They practice racism and so on there. They do not allow, Arabs do not allow Jews to live in their lands. However, in Israel, there are over 2 million Arabs that are citizens of Israel that hold jobs and positions. I mean, some Arabs are part of the Knesset. Some Arabs are judges, policemen, military. They fight in the army there. In Israel, Arabs are welcome, just like Christians are welcome. But in Arab lands, Christians aren't welcome and Jews are not welcome. So the Arabs really have a problem. They're the ones who are racist and can't get along with other people. But the Jews actually get along. But they make it look like in the press, everything you hear in the press, in the news, international stuff, it's always the Jews. The Jews are the bad people, the villains. Truth is, it's the other way around, which is sad, but that's truly how it is. And so why is there conflict in the Middle East? Well, simply this. Here's the answer. If we boil it down to one thing, it's the Quran. If you could remove Islam in the Quran from the picture, we would have peace in the Middle East. The Jews do not, they just simply want peace. They simply want to live at peace with their neighbors, but their neighbors will not allow that. And so they have to protect themselves, and they have to hit back. And so that's the sad story of the Middle East. Well, I hope this has been a help to you there, but there is hope, and that is hope. The hope is through Jesus Christ, and who, by the way, was a Jew. Well, we're going to stop here, but we'll be back again tomorrow at the corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you.